Do you know, if you study your body and its dynamics, you will find that you are fighting all the time. Most people are, some aren't, but most people are fighting the external world all the time. Very many people are afraid that they will fall apart or somehow disintegrate if they don't make efforts to hold themselves together, or else that they will be disintegrated by some outside agency if they're not constantly on the alert like this, all around, you see, to protect themselves. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't do that, but I'm inviting you to become immensely aware of the fact that if you do that at all, that you do it. And that you have, therefore, this sense of being alone, of being a particular, separate form that is unlike any other form on earth. That's just you. And concentrate on that. As you focus on that sensation of distinctness, we'll even call this one separateness, the thing to do with all feelings that you don't like is to experience them as deeply as possible and go into the inmost depths of loneliness, and indeed, let us say, the inmost depths of selfishness. Because you see, the sensation of being you, this curious, lonely center of awkward sensitivity, subject to the most peculiar feelings and pains and anxieties and all that sort of thing, all that is an essential prerequisite for feeling something else. These two experiences go together. So what anyone or any being whatsoever who has a sense of centrality, who has a sense of selfhood, who has a sense of identity, that sense of identity is inseparable from something else going on that is defined as not being me, as not being under my control, and that may jump at any time. So, what I want you to understand is that these two sensations, one of being the lonely, central, sensitive, vulnerable self, living in the midst of a world that feels other, but is not under your control, I want to try and show you that these two sensations are really one sensation, or rather two aspects of one sensation. You couldn't have the one experience without the other experience. Now, this is a rather good thing to know, because it means that you won't panic if you discover this. People who suffer from chronic anxiety are always in doubt, you see, about this relationship between what I feel as myself and what I feel as something else. Every living being is a manifestation of everything that there is. Crazy. But the thing is that what we do is to try and prevent people from realizing that this is so, by pointing out to them in the most subtle ways their limitations and seeing if we can phase them, make them uncertain, make them unsteady. It's like all sorts of games you can play where if a person wavers, he loses. But people play that with each other all the time. And the reason they do it is not the reason they think. It is that if everybody were perfectly clear that they were a manifestation of the divine being, nothing very much would happen. But so as to keep everybody a little bit unclear about it, the whole thing bugs itself and creates these little doubts. So what we're beginning with is these little doubts, you see, these sensations of blockage, of not being very sure of yourself, but knowing very much indeed that you are yourself and that you're alone and it's all up to you. The terrible feeling of responsibility. So what I'm trying to point out to you is if you intensify that feeling and bring it to its highest pitch, you will immediately realize that you are aware of it only by virtue of the entire sensation of something else, something defined as not you. So the feeling of not you and the feeling of you are relative. They go together, and you can't have the one without the other. And if you can't have the one without the other, that means there's a secret conspiracy between the two. They are really the same, but pretending to be different. Because the whole idea is if there wasn't a difference, you wouldn't know anything was happening. There'd be just yourself echoing back at you, you see. And you'd feel like a madman in a hall of mirrors, where everything you went was just yourself, you see, in all directions, just you. Well, that's no fun. You may think that I'm speaking in favor of some kind of schizoid, pluralistic universe. No, the whole point is this, that difference and every kind of variety of differentiation is the way through which unity is discovered. And the fact that men and women, for example, as a primordial kind of difference, never can really understand each other is tremendously exciting. Because that's a way by which something happens. If it makes a difference, then it's there. If it doesn't make a difference, it doesn't matter. And what doesn't matter doesn't exist, because it has no matter. So when you get this extreme sense of your own existence as a rather painful fact in the middle of everything else, the everything else feeling and the you feeling are two poles of one and the same process. So that the real you is what lies between these poles and includes both of them. This is one of the oldest ideas in the universe, that the universe is the interplay of difference, and the primordial difference is between up and down, back and front, black and white, is and isn't, male and female, positive and negative. Do you know somehow how you surprise yourself? For example, when you feel your own pulse, and you suddenly feel this life going on in you, which you're not willing. You say you have the belly rumbles, and you didn't intend to have the belly rumbles, and suddenly it happened. Is this something you're doing? Or is it merely something that's happening to you, as if it was raining and the rain was happening to you? Consider breathing. Are you breathing? Or is it breathing you? Well, you can feel it either way. You can decide to breathe and feel that you're breathing in just the same way that you walk when you want to. On the other hand, when you forget about breathing altogether, it still goes on. And so it seems to be something that happens to you. Which is it? What enables you to make a decision? When you decide, do you first decide to decide? Or do you just decide? Now, how do you do that? Nobody knows, you see. And that's a funny thing. We can experience ourselves through and through as something that just happens. Well, look at it this way. If you feel your body, your skin, the solidity of you, and with regard what marvelous eyes you have, which are the power which generate light and color out of all these electrical quanta in the external world, and these ears, these beautiful shells that you wear on the side of your head, with their little spiral bones, the cochlea inside, you know, all that. It's marvelous. But you don't feel responsible for this. You don't know how it's made, if it is made. But it's you. That's what you are. That extraordinary pattern. The extraordinary thing is, you see, that this is you. This extraordinary, marvelous arabesque of tubes and bones and cartilage and myriads of interconnecting electronics and nervous systems and everything wonderful. But you can feel it, all of it, as if it was just happening to you. But if you want to feel it that way, then you've got to go the whole way, and you've got to feel that your decisions just happen to you. And that the thing that you call yourself, to which things happen, is just something that happens. You don't know how you manage to be an ego, how you happen to be conscious. That just happened too. So happenings happen to a happening. When you get that way, that's a very interesting road to run. But you can try the other way. You can extend it and say, now look here. If I really am my eyes, although I don't understand them, I mean, that is to say, I can't describe it in words. This is me. It's an extraordinary thing, but it is. But I don't understand how it happens. But then, you see, that's the whole point. If you will accept the idea that you are your own eyes, and your own heart, and your own ears with that wonderful spiral cochlea inside, and all these amazing gadgets here, you're all that. Now, therefore, by a little extension of the imagination, you can very well see that if all those subtleties inside you feel other than your conscious ego, but nevertheless are one with it, the same argument will go for all the other things going on around you. The sun shining, the stars twinkling, the wind blowing, and the great ocean restlessly pounding against these cliffs. That's you too. You don't control it, of course, because there has to be something about you you don't control, or you wouldn't be you. Because to understand the principle of relativity is there's no self without other. You have to regard yourself as a cloud, because you see, clouds never make mistakes. Did you ever see a cloud that was misshapen? No, they always do the right thing. Now, so as a matter of fact do we, because we are natural beings, just like clouds and waves. Only we have complicated games which cause us to doubt ourselves. But if you will treat yourself for a while as a cloud or wave, and realize that you can't make a mistake, whatever you do, because even if you do something that seems to be totally disastrous, it'll all come out in the wash somehow or other. Then, through this capacity, you will develop a kind of confidence, and through confidence you will be able to trust your own intuition. Only the thing that you have to be careful about, and many people fall into trouble here, is that when they take the attitude that I can't possibly make a mistake, they overdo it, which shows that they don't really believe it. So a lot of people come on, so you put on the weirdest, filthiest clothes, and you go and steal things, and all kinds of things like that. That's overdoing it. That shows that you haven't learned. You're overcompensating. Because before you were told to do this, do that, and the other, and watch, and be self-conscious and nervous, and so on. And so you just go to the other extreme. But this is the middle way of knowing it has nothing to do with your decision to do this or not. Whether you decide that you can't make a mistake, or whether you don't decide it, it's true anyway, that you are like cloud and water. And through that realization, without overcompensating in the other direction, you will come to the point where you begin to be on good terms with your own being and to be able to trust your own brain. Everything in the world, knives and forks, tables and chairs, trees and stones, are indescribable. We can't say anything about everything, because in order to say something about something and state it logically, you have to be able to put it in a class. Now, classes are intellectual boxes. When you play games like animal, vegetable, and mineral, you've got there 3 boxes. And when you come to think of it, you don't know what any 2 of those boxes are really without the third, or especially you don't know any one without another. Because in order to have a box, there must be what's inside the box and what's outside the box. And then by this method of contrast, we can make a logical discussion about things. But then, when you come to something which is completely all-inclusive, to what fundamentally is, then you're without a box, and you can't talk logically. Of course, you can distinguish is from is not, but only in a very limited way, as I can say, I have a pen in my left hand, I do not have a pen in my right hand. And from this we abstract the idea of to be and not to be, is and isn't. But when we consider being with a capital B, this includes not only such ises as celestial bodies, but also such isn'ts as the space that encompasses them. And these 2 go together. A perfectly logical person would say that the notion of the self as the fundamental reality in which everything else exists is meaningless. And of course, from a logical point of view, it is. But at the same time, just because something cannot be put into a logical category does not indicate that it isn't real. It's saying that the self in each one of you is really at root one. Just in the same way that you have all over your body millions of nerve ends. Each one of those nerve ends is, as it were, a little eye. And it gets its impression of the world, but it sends it all back into the central brain. Well, in a somewhat similar way, every person, every animal, and even rocks are regarded as sentient beings in a very, very primitive form. So all those forms that we see may be looked upon as the eyes that look out of one central self. Only, of course, in the human body we can see the connections between the nerve ends and the brain. It's much more difficult to see the connection between one individual and another. And therefore it's very easy for us to form the impression that I am only what is inside my bag of skin. And that my ego, myself, is a different self from yourself. And we're all, therefore, fundamentally disconnected. No person exists alone. And we need, in order to live, the cooperation of a community, of a society, not only of people, but also of plants, many kinds of animals, insects, bacteria, air. Every kind of thing that is around us is as essential to our being as our heads. You can draw little gradations of some things that are more essential and some things that are less essential. But fundamentally, everything is necessary for your existence. So your apparent disconnection, the fact that you are not tied to other people with umbilical cords or some kind of wiring that gives you one mind. Nevertheless, we do have one mind, in the sense that, for example, all of us turn out to be approximately the same shape. 2 eyes, 2 nostrils, a mouth, 2 hands, 2 legs, and so on. But going yet deeper, we find that it's somehow a necessity of thought that there be some sort of a something which is the common ground of all these universes, all these galaxies. And that ground is the self. Now that's quite a startling point of view, because what it's saying is, you see, that you are basically the works. You have, going on all the time, 2 types of consciousness. Number 1, the things you notice. And you notice things by having words or other symbols which you attach to them. It's very difficult to notice a thing for which you don't have a name and which you can't classify by some sort of image or shape. There are peoples, of course, who notice things that we don't notice. Eskimos have 5 different words for snow, because snow is very important to them, and to us it's all just plain snow. There are all kinds of variations in language according to what people notice. So there's noticing consciousness, which we have courtesy of notation. But then there's also consciousness which doesn't notice, but nevertheless is highly responsive. You are responding at the moment to all kinds of stimuli coming to your nerve ends, which you don't notice at all. The way you are sitting is a response to unconscious stimuli. The way you adjust yourself and move, the way your heart beats, the way you breathe, the way you see. You don't know how you do that. You're doing it, but you don't know how it's done. So you see, consciousness in the ordinary sense, that is, say, conscious attention, doesn't notice everything. It only notices very little of the world. Just in the same way that conscious attention is not aware of all the other operations of the body, in just that way, we are not aware of our connection, indeed our identity, with the fundamental self. We go to sleep at night, and then we wake up, and because the physical brain is still there, we remember everything that happened the day before. But if the physical brain decomposes, then we're what is called dead. And we say, well, that's the end of that. But when the leaves die and fall off the trees, or the fruit drops, next year, more leaves, more fruit. So in the same way, when you and I die, more babies later. If the whole human race dies, you bet your life. There are all kinds of things that feel that they're human, scattered throughout the multiplicity of galaxies, because this universe is a peopling universe. But because we are unconscious of the intervals, we are not aware of the self with our conscious attention when conscious attention isn't operating. But still, just as you don't notice what your pineal gland, say, is doing at the moment, so in the same way, you don't notice the connections which tie us all together, not only here and now, but forever and ever and ever and ever. the basic reason why we don't notice the self is that the self doesn't need to look at itself. A knife doesn't need to cut itself. Fire doesn't need to burn itself. Water doesn't need to quench itself. And a light doesn't need to shine on itself. Nevertheless, it is possible, in a certain way, to become aware of oneself in this deepest sense, to know that you are the totality, to wake up from the hallucination that you are just poor little me, from that kind of hypnosis, and discover that you are simply something being done by this vast, indescribable self, which is out of time, which has no beginning, no end. It neither continues nor discontinues. It's beyond all categorization whatsoever. So when you are trying to know the self, you have to get rid of every idea in your head and see this everyday world just as it looks now, but see as clearly can be that it is all the self. If you look at the moon, you might imagine at full moon that you were looking at a disk until somebody points out to you that it's a ball. Sunrise is not the same event for a person who thinks that the Earth is the center of the solar system as it is for a person who knows that the sun is the center of the solar system and that the Earth is turning. Now, nothing in the way of a sense impression has changed, but your understanding of it has changed radically. The senses see the same event, but there is a different interpretation. And so seeing is done much more with the mind than with the eye. We see what we are taught to see. We see in terms of our ideological structure, our culture, our conditioning. And so all that conditioning teaches us to see the world in its separateness. But you can be deconditioned from that and see just this same world that you're looking at now in its unity. You must understand that when we talk of things, people, houses and waters and mountains, that thinking about them that way emphasizes their difference. It stresses differentiation. But you see, you don't really know what differentiation is unless you know what sameness is. Just as you don't know what to be is unless you know the meaning of not to be. And the boundaries of things which outline them, we say, well, I begin maybe up here, and above my head it's not me anymore. So this cranium thing, this skull with hair on top of it, divides me from space. True if you want to look at it that way, but it's equally true that my cranium joins me to space. Imagine what would happen to me if there weren't any space around me. My outline would thereupon disappear. Because you see, every boundary needs two sides, the inside and the outside. And you can't separate them. So boundaries are held in common. They join things as much as they divide them. Now, we are taught, you see, not to see that way. Our conscious attention is captured by figures within backgrounds, and it tends to ignore backgrounds. It is captured by things that move rather than things that are relatively still. And so when we see someone going up a hill, we say the man is going up the hill. We don't see also that the hill is coming down to the man. Every pull is also a push, and every push is also a pull. So you can become aware of this tremendous interconnectedness of everything. And that is, in a way, what we mean by relativity. Because relativity means relatedness. Just as fronts go with backs and tops with bottoms, insides with outsides, solids with spaces, so everything that there is goes together. And it makes no difference whether it lasts a long time or whether it lasts a short time. A galaxy goes together with all the universe just as much as a mosquito, which has a very short life. From the standpoint of the self, time is completely relative. You can have, if you scale it down, as much time between two of those very rapid drum beats as you can in eons and eons and eons. It's all a question of point of view or level of magnification. Change your magnification on your skin. Take out a magnifying glass and you don't see the familiar skin anymore. You see all the pores with hairs sticking out. Change it again and get a microscope and you see cellular structure. Get an ion microscope and you see molecules. And we know that it can get smaller and smaller and smaller, and that the spaces between these minute units are so vast that they're comparable to the distances between the sun and planets in scale. So also with time. So in this sense, there could be vast, vast universes full of empires and battleships and palaces and brothels and restaurants and orchestras in the tip of your fingernail. And on the other hand, we could be all going on in the tip of somebody else's fingernail. It's very important to understand not only the relativity of size and of time, but also of what there is. Now, as you know, the human senses respond only to a very small band of the known spectrum of vibrations. We know through instruments of quite a vast spectrum, but we, as I say, with our senses, see only a little of it. If our senses were in some way altered, we would see a rather different looking world. We can do this, of course. We can put on special lenses to enable us to see heat. And then we see all the heat radiations coming out of people. And we say, well, I never noticed that about you before. But so in the same way, you see, there are infinitely many possibilities of vibration and of organs sensitive to those vibrations, so that there could be worlds within worlds within worlds, spaces within spaces, just like the many, many wavelengths of radio and television, going on forever and ever in all directions. The possibilities are infinite. But having senses and noticing is a selective process. It picks out only certain ones, just as when you play the piano. You don't take both arms and slam down all keys at once. You select. And so perception is a kind of piano playing. It is picking out certain things as significant, that is to say, as constituting patterns. And the whole universe seems to be a process of playing with different patterns. But whatever it does, whatever it plays, in whatever dimension, on whatever scale of time or space, it's all on the self. Every self is modeled on and is an expression of the one self, because you all feel individually that you're the center of the world, and everything else is seen in circles, circling out, sphering out from where you are. And that's, as it were, they call them microcosm, the little cosmos. But then in the same way, the macrocosm has a central self, although this is not central in the way we talk about centers in space. The center of a circle is in the middle of the circle, and the circumference is away from it. It isn't in the middle of the universe, spatially speaking. You might ask the question, where is the universe? Well, you can't say where, because every where has to be in relation to something. There would have to be another universe to say where this one is. But then, since those two together would constitute the universe, we wouldn't still be able to say where it was. It isn't anywhere. And so in that sense, the center isn't anywhere in space locally. And furthermore, the kind of space we are dealing with is only one possible kind of space. It's the kind of space our physical organisms are attuned to. What is this that I call I? That's one of the very fascinating questions. It's also, it teases us out of thought to think about death in the sense of going to sleep and never waking up. Imagine that. And you find you can't, and yet it's a thought that although you can't get to grips with it, it remains fascinating. Also the question, how is it suddenly that you awakened into this world? Where were you before? And that's the same sort of weird question as what it would be like to go to sleep and never wake up. What was it like to wake up having not previously gone to sleep? It's very mysterious. But as you go on and plumb this question, you begin to develop the feeling that your existence is exceedingly odd. In many ways odd. Odd because it is here and it so easily might not have been. After all, if your father hadn't met your mother, would you be here? Now, of course, somebody would be here, because he might have met somebody else. Would that be you? Of course it would. Don't you see? You can only be you by being someone. But every someone is you. Every someone is I. That's your name, you say. It's me. I am here. And everybody feels that I in the same way. It's the same feeling. Just like blue everywhere is the same color. So I-ness being, as it were, the most fundamental thing in man is also fundamental to the universe. It too is I. And our I is a special case of it, coming out from the, in quotes, central I. So you see, there's really nothing to worry about, because the important you is perfectly indestructible. It's what there is. You must remember, of course, that the word play and the word game have many levels of meaning. We are accustomed to use the word play in opposition to work, and to regard play as trivial and work as serious. "You're only playing with me," says a girl to a suitor. "You're not serious." We also use the word play in a non-trivial sense. We say, "I went to a play." Well, what did you go to? Oh, it was Hamlet, a tragedy. But it was still a play. I say too, when I do philosophy, like I'm doing with you, this is entertainment. But in the sense, perhaps I hope, of you're listening to someone play a musical classic. I'm not being serious, but I am being sincere. So, play is deeply the sort of thing children like to do with deep absorption and fascination. Now, what do people like to do when they don't have to do it? Well, as far as I can make out, as you look all over the world, they like to get together and do something rhythmic. They may dance, they may sing, they may even play games. All sorts of ways in which we love to do this. And we can get so absorbed in rhythm that there are certain kinds of rhythmic activity which we consider extremely important. Now, you see, our very existence is a rhythm of waking and sleeping, eating and moving, and that's all we're doing. And just consider what we do every day. What's it all about? Does it really mean anything? Does it go anywhere? It's just because we want to keep on doing this kind of a hoop-de-da. So you can get a certain vision of life where everything is seen to be a complex pattern of rhythm. Dances, the human dance, the flower dance, the bee dance, the giraffe dance. And that's what this all is. It's jazz. See? This is a big jazz, this world. And what it's trying to do is to see how jazzed up it can get. How far out this play of rhythm can go. So then that is why you see this fundamental view that the world is play.
And so in all this, you see, when you get a game going of this kind, there comes the point of what you might call emotional investment. When you feel that the outcome of this particular feature in the game is urgent. See, this matters. And it's up to you what you think matters. We teach our children what matters, what's important for them to learn. And we teach them basically that it's important to live. You must go on. That's terribly important. But when you see you have this terrifying urgency to go on, and feel you must, this is important, this matters, we screen out of our consciousness the fact that this is our own volition and our own game, because we are captivated by the illusion of the necessity and the importance of going on, to keep other people going on, to keep children going on, to keep this thing up. And the difficulty is that as we become disturbed and anxious about this, it's more difficult to keep the game going. In proportion as we are frightfully concerned to survive, we start fighting other people. We start clobbering our neighbors who are stealing our crops, and whatever it is, all the old fights start. And it is these fights which, more than anything else, at the moment, you see, are endangering the entire human project. But all based fundamentally on the illusion that it's utterly important that we survive. the illusion that I am going on, that I constitute a real continuity from this moment to the next moment, to the next moment, to the next moment. What are you afraid of losing when you die? Why? All the capital you've acquired during your life, the experiences, the friends, the status, the skills, everything that you remember would be destroyed ordinarily when you die. In other words, we are afraid of losing the past. Now, it's perfectly obvious that when you die, yes, everything that you've acquired as an individual and stored in your brain is dissolved and distributed. But at the same time, it is equally obvious that when you die, there won't be, following the moment of death, everlasting nothingness. When you die, you're always reborn, just as you were before. When you came into this world, there gradually arose into being the sensation of I. And it stays there a while, it goes through a development, and then it drops off. But all the time, everywhere, there are other I's starting up. See? Whether they be human, animal, anything you like. They be in other galaxies, etc. Always, they're starting up. Now, you would say, is there no connection between them? No, in the same way there is no connection between the molecules in your hand. And yet you say it is a hand. But if you look at it under a powerful enough microscope, the molecules in your hand are miles apart. And you would say there's no connection between them. What's the connection between this galaxy and other galaxies? Well, we can't see any connection. And yet there are gravitational swings whereby they respond to each other and move in a certain collective order. So in a very similar way, the constant appearance of beings who feel that they are I constitute a wave motion. You can see it either way. You can see yourself, in other words, as existing only now. That's the only you there is. The alternative to that, logically, is to see yourself as everything. So everybody is involved in playing the game of life in a way that goes beyond play and becomes deadly serious. And as a result, the whole of existence is lived in a state of constant frustration, because you are trying all the time to hold together and to preserve something which in the long run can't be preserved at all. And therefore, in response to this cry of pain which everybody puts up as a result of being in this situation, of trying to hold on to things, the wisdom of the various ways of liberation, be they Hindu, Buddhist, or whatever, is saying to everybody, look now, cool it, wake up. This is the kind of thing that's going on, and you are not a captive in a trap. You're not just some mere little measly being that somehow or other was brought into an insane universe. But you are what the thing is. You are not the victim. You are the system. Only you have identified yourself with a one wave in it. That is to say, a particular accumulation of memories, of associations, of skills, of things that you've learned. And you don't want to let go of them, because you found in that accumulation of memories, which you call yourself, an identity. So you know where you are, or think you do. But actually, you don't need to be anywhere. Where is the universe? Think up an answer to that one. And so the question, where is the universe, is really ultimately the same question as where are you? And so what this is saying is, look, let go. It's all right to play the game, be involved, work out the various intrigues, problems, creative projects, and so on that life involves. That's fine. But if you get involved in it so that you're hung up, this deprives you of delight and joy in playing the game. So the point is to get people unhung up on the whole thing. No point of view is the right one. Infinitely many points of view are possible. But if you take a point of view and you insist that's the only point of view, then you're hung up on it. So long as you insist that black is black and white is white and that there are Republicans and Democrats and capitalists and communists and good guys and bad guys, it's a hang-up. So also between what is you and what is other than you. I would begin, you see, with the assumption that every person, every sentient being whatsoever, is I. I is simply the universe aware of itself at a particular place and time. That's what the word I means. And so the feeling that we call I is how everything feels on the inside. But it is always in a particular place at a particular time. And these particular places and particular times, they keep going on and on and on and on and on. Myriads of them, all over. And you feel that you are I just as much as I feel that I am I. And your I feeling and my I feeling are essentially the same. Only we're looking from different places. But it's all one I. Only we don't see this because we are hung up on the coming and going of I, on the particular circumstances in which every I appears. So because of our myopia, because our point of view is fascinated by the details and the differentiations between everything that's going on, the differentiations between people, the differentiations between generations, we are so preoccupied with that particular view of things that we're hung up on it. And we don't see that it's the same thing happening again and again and again. That every I that comes into this world is you. All I's are I, wherever soever scattered, because you see this is the place, at the point called here and now, this universe knows itself on the inside. You look around you and you see everything, as it were, presenting an exterior to you. But my relationship to the other is always seeing life on the outside. However much I get down to the tiniest cells that constitute your nervous system, if I go down into the molecules, I go down into the atoms, I'm still regarding them from the outside. The only point at which I know the thing on the inside is where I am. Then I have inside knowledge of what everywhere else appears to be outside. So to realize inside, there must, of course, at the same time be outside. To realize self, there must be the counterbalance of other. Because it's like black and white, it's like back and front. They're inseparable. So then, this is where we start from, that every being coming into this world is I, and they keep on coming doesn't matter how long the intervals are between their appearances. Supposing this planet were completely wiped out, that would be the end of this race, in just the same way as, say, a group of insects will eat their food supply up on a plant, and the whole population will perish. Happens again and again. But it seems perfectly reasonable to suppose, in other words, that there is a constant rhythm of what we call consciousness, being awake to life, going on, just as stars go on and on. If the stars are going on all over the place, if galaxies are going on all over the place, it's equally reasonable to suppose that life is going on all over the place. And although the distances from our particular point of view between these islands of life may be vast, don't forget that the distances between the molecules in your own body are equally vast on their scale. Distance, space, isn't just removal. Space isn't just nothing. This is the grand delusion that space is somehow a thing to be ignored. This is very clearly explainable in terms of the Gestalt theory of perception. The Gestalt theory of perception is that we notice the figure and ignore the background. We notice what is a relatively small enclosed space and ignore the more dispersed. We notice what moves against what is relatively still, and what is relatively still is ignored. So likewise, when we get a constant stimulus of consciousness, we begin to ignore it and not to notice it. And consciousness tends always to notice novel things, novel changes in the environment. So the most unnoticed things in life are those which are the most constant and the most regular. And because you see you lose touch with the most constant and the most regular things, you screen them out of your general thought as insignificant. They don't matter. They're not there. And the most ignored thing is space. Because space is always the background. The solids are the figures. And therefore we say, simply, space is just nothing. It may be filled around this planet for a little distance with air, which is important, but out there, space, that's nothing at all. And so we say that is nothing. But all that is saying is that that is the background to every figure. And as the figure cannot be there without the background, the solid cannot be there without the space. So the space of the world is the one thing we've forgotten. And the one thing that is absolutely essential to there being anything at all. So then, we must realize that what we call separate things, separate molecules, separate lives, separate planets, separate stars, separate galaxies, are joined by space. Space, in other words, is a relationship between solids. You would not be able to think about space without a relationship between solids. But so goes for everything. It is how it is spaced that creates the significance and interest of any being whatsoever. You say, for example, the human body consists of about 95 cents worth of chemicals. But how it's arranged. Playing a violin by a great master is just scraping cat's entrails with horsehair. But how it's done. See? So the order of the way things are distributed is the magic. What are we doing, you see? You've got a universe which you're living in, which is fundamentally wiggly. And you are an event in this wiggle, see? Only you're trying to straighten it out. You're trying to see order in it. And your doing this is itself a wiggle. After all, you may say, one or two things in here are straight, you know? And it's their nature to go that way, to be orderly things, to be straight things, or whatever other quality you want to put on it. And we are like that. We are something in this which has it in its nature to arrange it this and that way, to want to see things straight. But actually, there really isn't anything in the whole arrangement that is the right way of doing it. And there isn't anything in life, in your life, that is supposed to happen. You're not supposed to live to be 80 or to die when you're 23. So, liberation is the realization there is no way that things are supposed to be. You are, you know, you're what there is. It's up to you to decide. See? There's no way it has to happen. But on the other hand, if you want to feel that there is some way you would like to arrange this, I mean, we can start pushing these things around, you know, and put them in some kind of an order. That's okay, too. You will be miserable to the degree that you are hung up on the notion that things should, must go a certain way. That is to say, to have a fixed view. If you have no fixed view, you remain elastic. And about this, there is always something that can't quite be said. When we say, I have no fixed view, it sounds as if I were just a non-entity, like a moron. But there's another sense of an empty mind than that. Not the moronic empty mind, but the lively empty mind. The empty mind that can either let it alone or project patterns onto it. And especially do both. So that instead of saying what you really ought to do is to project no pattern onto the world and realize that it's all fundamentally senseless, is to say always do both at the same time. Project the patterns, but realize at the same time there is no fixed view that you should take. This is exactly the same thing as being able to realize that there are rights and wrongs and things that should be done and should not be done. But at the same time, there's another point of view from which you can see that everything that happens is right the way it is, and that human life never makes an aesthetic mistake, just as the patterns of the clouds and of the foam never make aesthetic mistakes.
Now, I want to get down to the simplest possible nitty-gritty of what we've been talking about in a very easy way. To ask ourselves the question, quite fundamentally, what's all the trouble about? In other words, what is your state of mind when you contemplate the possibility of everything becoming nothing? All right, so the universe is a transitory system, like a bubble, like smoke, like foam on the water. And so, how easy? Just go along with it, dissolve. So, what's the problem? Why don't we want to give up What do we think we're going to get by holding on and by resisting the dissolution? What I'm interested in for you to feel is, what do you really feel like inside at the prospect of there being nothing, of this whole thing being a bubble that dissolves? You see, about death, the reality of approaching death, people are apt to feel chilly, cold, lonely, scared because it's an unknown. The most frightening thing about death is there might be something beyond it, and you don't know what it is. The world is full of threats, mostly from other people. And there are monsters. There are all sorts of things which scare you, but beyond every monster is death. Dissolution is the end of it all. And so long as we can be scared of that, and so long as we can be made to think of death as a bad thing, we can be ruled. Because what end can it all come to? What's all the trouble about? The most it can come to is nothing. I mean, there may be some troubles on the way of resisting this, basically resisting it. And so in this resistance, there's an experience called pain. But beyond pain is annihilation. What will it be like to go to sleep and never wake up? Nobody can think about it. But what is that state when you're teased out of thought? This is not, as you would fantasize it, a state of being in the dark forever. It is not like being buried alive, because then there's an experience of darkness. Now, so, when you really think about nothingness, it becomes like how your head looks to your eyes. And behind the eyes, you don't see darkness, do you? You're not aware of a contrast of light here, black there. Behind the visual field, there is simply nothing conceivable at all, neither darkness nor light. So, might one venture to say almost that that area of blankness we call death is what lies behind the eyes? In other words, it is what we can't think about that's what's watching. Use your imagination for all it's worth to think yourself into the fact that of this whole sense of importance, of vitality, of aliveness, of being, is simply a sudden experience which was nothing before it started and will be nothing after it's over. That is the simplest possible thing you could believe in. It requires no intellectual effort. Nothing. Supposing that's the way it is. What's your inside feeling about that? Supposing, let's say, you feel sorry. For whom is this sorrow? Who, when it's all over, will there be to feel sorry? You say, I regret now that this thing is going to come to an end. But when it's come to an end, nobody will either regret or be happy about it. That will be there. So in a way, you can say, well, this feeling of sorrow that I have that it's going to come to an end is really rather irrelevant, because let me look at the thing from the other direction. Supposing it never would come to an end. In other words, here is this alternation of joy and sorrow. And however happy I am today, I'm always going to feel miserable later on. And then maybe happy again, but then after that miserable. And this is never going to stop. I just can't get rid of the damn thing. Well, that's pretty depressing, isn't it? I mean, when you think it through. So you say, well, Let's make a compromise between these two possibilities. This compromise is, in other words, that it will disappear altogether, but then it'll start again. Because when it starts again, it'll feel like it does now, which is that it never happened before. So you're always in the same place, just like you feel now. There is this blank space, this trough between the crests of the waves. Now I'm going to pull a fast one on you. So, every time an incarnation occurs, it feels like this one. See, it might be quite different. We might be reincarnated in another universe as beings of an altogether different shape. Not at all like human beings. But because we were used to it, we would feel that that was the human shape. We would say, well, that's natural. Obviously, that's the way things are. So naturally, if you appeared in the form of a spider, you would look around at other spiders and say, well, yes, of course, this is natural shape to be in. This is the human shape. Something that is not us looks at us and thinks we look perfectly terrible. I mean, imagine how you look to a fish. Clumsy, cumbersome, stupid-looking thing. Because a fish is so elegant and graceful and can slide through the water so beautifully. The human beings can't even swim properly. So don't you see that in every world that comes into being, or could come into being, it seems just like it seems now. And every species that you could belong to would seem like this one. It would have its up end of what is highly intelligent and its low end of what is not so intelligent. You would be aware of superior forces and inferior forces. But the things that appear to be above us are great natural processes. Only we think they're rather stupid, only very tough, too strong for us. Earthquakes, the elements. But at any rate, whatever level you're on, it always appears to be the same one. Therefore, naturally, don't we? We feel we're in the middle. We feel, for example, with the telescope, that there is a world greater than us that is infinitely greater. We feel with the microscope there's a world below us that's infinitely smaller, and we seem to stand in the middle. Anything that grows anywhere is always in the middle. It's betwixt and between. And the middle always has, therefore, extremes. It has extremes in space. As far west and as far east as you can think. As far on and as far back. And there's always a beginning and there's always an end. Just as there's a left and a right. If you are aware of a state which you call is, or reality, or life, this implies another state called isn't, or illusion, or unreality, or nothingness, or death. There it is. You can't know one without the other. And so as to make life poignant, it's always going to come to an end. That is exactly, don't you see, what makes it lively. Liveliness is change, is motion. So, you see, you're always at the place where you always are. And you think, wowee, a little further on we'll get that thing. I hope we don't go further down so that we lose what we already have. But that is built into every creature's situation, no matter how high, no matter how low. So, in this sense, all places are the same place. And the only time you ever notice any difference is in the moment of transition. When you go up a bit, you gain. When you go down a bit, you feel disappointed, gloomy, lost. Death seems so final. Nothingness seems so very, very irrevocable and permanent. But then if it is, what about the nothingness that was before you started? So don't you see? What we've left out of our logic, and this is part of the game rule of the game that we're playing, the way we hoodwink ourselves is by attributing powerlessness to nothingness. We don't realize that is a complete logical fallacy. On the contrary, it takes nothing to have something. Because you wouldn't know what something was without nothing. You wouldn't know what the form is without the background space. You wouldn't be able to see anything unless there were nothing behind your eyes. So if you really go the whole way and see how you feel at the prospect of vanishing forever, of all your efforts and all your achievements and all your attainments turning into dust and nothingness, what is the feeling? What happens to you? Do you see, in a way, how that is saying the most real state is the state of nothing? That's what it's going to all come to. But if somebody is going to argue that the basic reality is nothingness, where does all this come from? Obviously from nothingness. Once again, you get how it looks behind your eyes, see? So cheer up, you see, by seeing that nothingness is the fundamental reality, and you see it's your reality. Then how can anything contaminate you? All the idea of your being scared and put out and worried and so on is just nothing. It's a dream. Because you're really nothing. But this is the most incredible nothing. All the sun, moon, and stars, and the mountains and rivers, and the good men and the bad men, and the animals and the insects, the whole bit, all are contained in void. So out of this void comes everything, and you're it. What else could you be?